The moment Karen sprayed Teddy in the face, I knew this wasn't just another HOA dispute.
Yelps.
The air was thick with tension as my service dog yelped, pawing at his eyes, and the officers stood there, frozen. I had been trained to handle far worse. But this crossed a line. My blood boiled as she smirked, convinced she'd won. But what she didn't realize was that she'd just declared war. I didn't need a weapon to fight back. All I needed was the truth, and I was about to make her wish she never picked a fight with me. But as I turned to leave, a chilling thought hit me. How far would I go to protect my own? Karen Jordan was the kind of person who believed the world existed to serve her whims. As the president of the Greenfield Meadows HOA, she didn't just enforce rules, she commanded them. It wasn't enough that her house looked like a cookie-cutter model of suburban perfection. She needed the whole neighborhood to bend to her vision. From the color of the mailboxes to the precise angle of the sprinkler heads, everything had to be just so. The idea of any imperfection, especially something as disruptive as a barking dog, drove her crazy. And then there was me, Jack Dalton. I wasn't the easiest target. I'd spent years serving my country, dealing with chaos far worse than a petty HOA president. But Karen had no respect for boundaries, and I was quickly finding out that she saw me, and my service dog Teddy, as her next conquest. It started with a single bark. Teddy was always calm, but a backfiring truck startled him, and that one bark was enough to set her off. She didn't care about context or the fact that Teddy was trained to help with my PTSD. To Karen, that single bark wasn't just a dog reacting. It was a threat to her perfect world. And from that moment on, I was marked as the problem. I couldn't back down. But Karen didn't know what she was dealing with. She wasn't the only one who could be relentless, and she'd soon find out just how far I'd go to protect my dog and my life. I had come to Greenfield Meadows looking for peace, a place to settle down after years of service, far from the noise of the world. The house wasn't much, but it was mine. A quiet bungalow with a small yard where I could grow old with my service dog, Teddy, who had been my constant companion since my military days. I used to handle bomb-sniffing dogs in the toughest, most dangerous places in the world, and now my mission was much simpler: find calm. Teddy was the perfect partner for that. He was a golden retriever, a gentle soul who helped keep the noise in my head from taking over. He was my lifeline in a world that had moved on without me. When I found this place, it seemed like the perfect fit. Suburban life had its appeal: wide streets, calm mornings, and a neighborhood that seemed welcoming. It was the kind of place where people waved from their porches and kids played ball in the street. A far cry from the chaos I had known. The HOA's rules seemed harmless enough at first, standard stuff about lawns, fences, and noise, but I had no idea how tightly Karen Jordan, the HOA president, controlled every inch of it. The cracks in my new peaceful life began to show quickly. The first sign was small, an offhand comment about the height of my grass. But soon Karen made it clear that no one was above her authority. A misplaced trash bin was enough to earn a warning. It was all minor at first, until that morning with Teddy. We were on our usual walk, enjoying the quiet when a truck backfired, and Teddy, as trained, barked once. It was a reflex, nothing more. But that was enough for Karen to see me as a target. She wasn't just concerned about barking. It became clear that Karen was on a personal mission to clean up the neighborhood, starting with me and Teddy. I was just the latest in a long list of residents who had crossed her path. She was the queen of perfection, the enforcer of order, and she'd decided that my service dog didn't belong. What started as a simple dispute over a bark turned into a full-fledged campaign to remove Teddy and punish me. I had no idea how far she would go, but I quickly learned that this battle wouldn't be about just one dog. It would be about protecting everything I had fought for. What was meant to be peace had turned into a war, and I wasn't backing down. It started off small. A note in my mailbox, handwritten with the precise neatness of a drill sergeant's instructions. "Please ensure your dog remains quiet during morning hours," it read. There was no mention of a specific incident, no details. Just a demand. I thought it was a one-off. After all, Teddy wasn't a loud dog. He only barked when something startled him, and even then, it was a single, sharp bark. He wasn't the type to yap all day like the tiny, high-strung dogs on the block. But the message stuck with me. It gnawed at me, a reminder that the HOA's watchful eyes were always on me, and worse, on my dog. The next morning, as I took Teddy for our usual walk down the street, I saw Karen in her usual spot by her front yard. She wasn't just tending to her garden, she was watching me. I felt her eyes on the back of my neck as we passed by. The whole scene was too normal, too quiet. Yet my instincts told me something wasn't right. The tension hung in the air, thick enough to taste. As we walked back home, I saw her again, standing by her pristine mailbox, arms crossed. "Jack," she called out, her voice sharp. "Your dog disturbed the peace again this morning." I took a deep breath. "He barked once, Karen," I said, keeping my tone even. "That's not what I'm talking about," she snapped. "The community doesn't tolerate disruptions." And with that, she turned, disappearing inside her perfect home. It wasn't just about Teddy anymore. It was about control. She had her rules, and she intended to make sure everyone followed them. But the unease in the pit of my stomach told me this was just the beginning. It didn't take long before Karen's need for control crossed a line. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Then, one morning, as Teddy and I walked down the street, I noticed something strange. My lawn had been marked. A small, barely visible red tag fluttered from the corner of my fence. It was subtle, but I knew what it meant. I knew who it came from. The HOA. I pulled the tag off, my fingers curling around it like a curse. The note on it read, "Violation. Lawn height exceeds standard. Immediate corrective action required." I stood there for a moment, the anger bubbling up inside me. This wasn't about a dog or a few blades of grass. It was about control. This was Karen Jordan making her presence known again, and this time it was personal. I checked the lawn, and sure enough, there was a patch that was a little taller than the rest, but it was barely noticeable. Nothing that should have earned a violation. But Karen had her way of manipulating the system, making sure everything was perfectly aligned to her vision. I marched over to her house, the red tag clutched in my fist, and rang her doorbell. When she answered, her eyes flicked to the tag, and then to me. "Is there a problem, Jack?" she asked, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "This is harassment, Karen," I said, holding up the tag. "My lawn doesn't need to be perfect for you." She tilted her head, giving me that look, half sympathetic, half smug. "It's not about perfection, Jack. It's about maintaining order." Her words were nothing more than a cover for her obsession with control, and I knew it. But I wasn't going to let her dictate my life anymore. I turned and walked back to my house, my pulse thumping in my ears. The battle lines had been drawn. But Karen wasn't just messing with my grass. She was messing with my life. The real damage came sooner than I expected. It was a week later when I woke up to find my mailbox destroyed. Shattered pieces of wood and metal lay scattered across my yard. My heart sank. This wasn't a simple knockover. This was deliberate. Someone had destroyed my mailbox, and I knew exactly who was behind it. I checked my security camera feed. The footage was clear. Karen's car had been parked across the street late the previous evening, and I could see the shadowy figure of a person walking toward my property. The footage was grainy, but it was unmistakable. It was her. I couldn't believe it. Karen had crossed every line, and now she was vandalizing my property. I felt the rage rising, but I kept it under control. Teddy was by my side, calm as always, but even he seemed to sense the shift in the air. I called the police. Officer Miller arrived first, his usual tired expression replaced with an eyebrow raised in suspicion. "Another complaint, Jack?" he asked. I nodded. "My mailbox is destroyed, and I've got footage of the person who did it. It's Karen Jordan." Miller sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You've got to be kidding me." He followed me to the footage, and when he saw it, his eyes widened. "That's her. I'll make a report. But you know how this goes. It's your word against hers." I knew. But the evidence was mounting, and I wasn't going to let Karen get away with this. Not anymore. Karen wasn't done. She wasn't going to let my fight be that easy. A few days after the mailbox incident, I got a call from Officer Ruiz with animal control. He was coming to my house for a routine inspection, he said, due to a report of a dangerous animal in the neighborhood. I knew it was her. The next step in her plan to get rid of me. and Teddy. When Officer Ruiz arrived, I didn't hesitate. "I'm not going to let her do this," I said, stepping outside to meet him. "Mr. Dalton," Ruiz said, flipping through his clipboard, "we've received a report about your dog being a danger to the community." I snorted in disbelief. "A danger? My dog barely barks. He's a service animal." But Ruiz wasn't convinced. "We have a sworn statement from a witness," he said, eyeing me carefully. I froze. A witness? My mind raced. Could Karen have fabricated more lies? The thought made my blood boil. "Who's the witness?" Ruiz hesitated. "I can't say." I didn't need to hear anymore. "This is a lie. Karen Jordan is behind it all. She's been harassing me for weeks." But Ruiz wasn't interested in the truth. He handed me a quarantine order for Teddy. "Your dog must stay in the house for the time being. No walks, no contact with other animals or people. We'll need to review the case in a few days." I gritted my teeth. I had no choice but to comply. For now. But I knew Karen wasn't going to stop here. She was escalating, and the stakes were getting higher. The real tipping point came the next morning. Animal control arrived again, this time with a warrant for Teddy's immediate seizure. I stood frozen at the door, my mind racing. 24 hours earlier, I had been fighting Karen over a mailbox. Now, she was trying to take my dog. Teddy was lying by the front door, his eyes watching me like he could sense what was happening. The officers didn't give me a chance to explain. They knocked, and before I knew it, Teddy was in their custody, placed into a cage and ready to be transported to the shelter. I was done standing by and watching this happen. Teddy's future, my home, everything I had fought for was on the line. I had to act. The moment I let them take him would be the moment I gave up. And that was something I wasn't willing to do. I'd been pushed too far. This was war, and I wasn't about to lose. The clock was ticking, and I knew I had to turn the tables fast, or lose everything I loved. The battle for Teddy's life had begun. The HOA meeting had been set up as a formality. Karen was ready to use it as a stage, to rally the troops and paint me as the villain. When I walked into the room, I could feel the eyes on me. There were a few familiar faces, neighbors who had stayed quiet during the whole ordeal, not wanting to rock the boat. But today, I wasn't here to play by Karen's rules. Today, I was here to expose her for the fraud she was. Karen was sitting at the front of the room, her usual air of self-importance surrounding her like an invisible cloak. The board members, 2 of her lackeys, were flanking her like obedient soldiers. She gave me a small smile, sharp as a blade, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She knew I wasn't going to just roll over. She banged her gavel, signaling the start of the meeting. "This emergency meeting of the Greenfield Meadows Homeowners Association is now in session," she announced, her voice cutting through the room. She glanced at me again, her gaze cold. "The first and only item on our agenda is the clear and present danger posed by the animal residing at 124 Willow Lane." I stood up, my voice steady. "Excuse me, Miss Jordan," I interrupted. "Before we discuss these sanctions, I'd like to discuss the incident you're referring to, the so-called dog bite." The room went still. Karen's expression flickered for just a moment, her mask slipping, and I knew then she hadn't expected me to challenge her so boldly. "There is nothing to discuss," she snapped. "We have a sworn statement from a witness. This dog is a danger." I took a deep breath. "You say you have a witness, Karen, but I'd love to know the name of the child who was allegedly bitten. Surely there would have been a police report, or at least some kind of official documentation if this was as severe as you claim." The silence in the room deepened. The neighbors exchanged looks, their eyes narrowing. Karen's face was flushing now. "The family wishes to remain anonymous," she stammered. "They fear retaliation from him." I interrupted again, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Retaliation? I'm the one being evicted? I'm the one whose service dog is being threatened with death. You're trying to tear apart my life, Karen, and the least you can do is tell the truth." She recoiled at my words, her face reddening. "You," she began, her voice rising in anger. "How dare you?" The moment I'd been waiting for had arrived. I turned slightly and nodded to the back of the room. Sarah, the assistant who had once been Karen's puppet, stood up. She was trembling, but her eyes were defiant. The room collectively held its breath. Karen froze, Her eyes went wide, her mouth opening and closing as though she couldn't find the words. "Sarah," Karen said, her voice faltering. "What are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth, Karen," Sarah said, her voice shaking but clear. "There was no child. There was no bite. I was there. Jack Dalton's dog was on a leash and did nothing. Karen Jordan sprayed the dog in the face for no reason. She then forced me to file a false report with animal control. She threatened my job if I didn't comply. She wrote the statement and forced me to sign it." A collective gasp rippled through the room. The two board members were speechless, staring at Karen in shock. Neighbor Duke's jaw dropped. For the first time, he wasn't sneering at me. He was staring at Karen in disbelief. Karen's face went white, a look of pure panic overtaking her. "No, she's lying. She's just bitter." Sarah held up a piece of paper, her voice strong now. "I have a sworn notarized affidavit right here." She walked forward, placing the paper on the table for everyone to see. "I've already sent a copy to Animal Control and the District Attorney's office." The room was in chaos now, with murmurs of disbelief spreading like wildfire. But Sarah wasn't done. That's when Marcus stood up from the back of the room, a slight grin on his face. He raised his phone slowly, the red light on it flickering to life. "Just so everyone is aware," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "This entire meeting is being live-streamed." Karen's face drained of color. She looked at the phone, then at the faces of the neighbors, and her panic escalated. She tried to regain control, her voice rising in a desperate screech. "This is slander! This is a personal attack! You can't do this!" The two uniformed officers who had been stationed by the door stepped forward, and I could feel the power in the room shift. One of them spoke, his voice flat. "Interfering with a service dog is a crime, and ADA protections apply." Karen's knees nearly buckled as she looked from Marcus's phone to the officers. "What?" she sputtered, but there was no escape now. Marcus grinned wider. "We've got about 500 viewers right now, including reporters from Channel 4 News. Maybe you'd like to repeat your accusations for them, Miss Jordan." Karen's face was a mask of fear and fury. She grabbed her binder, trying to flee the stage, but Mrs. Gable, the neighbor she had terrorized with her constant complaints, stepped in front of her. "You're not going anywhere," Mrs. Gable said, her voice resolute. It was over. The power Karen had clung to for so long was slipping through her fingers. The truth had shattered her carefully constructed web of lies, and there was nothing she could do to stop the fallout. As she stood there, trying to regain her composure, the room erupted into murmurs of disbelief. People were no longer afraid. They were angry. And Karen Jordan, the self-proclaimed queen of Greenfield Meadows, was finished. The meeting that was supposed to bury me had just become her public execution, and I wasn't the one holding the knife. It was her own lies that had done her in. The next morning, the weight of it all started to settle in. The orange quarantine sign still hung on my door, but I knew it was just a relic of a battle already won. I had fought for Teddy, for my life, and for what was right, and somehow, against all odds, we had come out on top. I stepped outside, the cool morning air filling my lungs. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the constant knot of tension in my stomach. Teddy, ever the loyal companion, trotted beside me, his tail wagging. He was the same as always, but everything around us had changed. As I walked down the street, I noticed something different. Neighbors who had kept their distance during the entire ordeal were now waving at me, giving me nods of approval. Mrs. Gable, who had been too afraid to speak up, was out in her garden again, her eyes soft with apology. Even Duke, the guy who had once sneered at me, was out scrubbing his driveway with an energy I hadn't seen before. It was as if the neighborhood had been waiting for someone to stand up, and once I had, they found their courage too. The fear that Karen had instilled in them, that deep sense of helplessness, had begun to crack. I walked to the mailbox, my heart lighter than it had been in months, and opened it. Inside was a letter from Animal Control. I braced myself, expecting more bureaucratic nonsense. But when I read it, I couldn't stop the smile that crept onto my face. The quarantine was lifted. Teddy was cleared of all charges. It was over. The fallout from the live-streamed meeting was swift and unrelenting. By the time the evening news had finished airing, the story had gone viral. The footage of Karen's meltdown, the community's shift, and the proof of her manipulation were too much for even the most die-hard HOA supporters to ignore. By the end of the week, Karen Jordan's grip on the neighborhood had shattered. The HOA board, who had once been her enforcers, now found themselves in the hot seat. In a surprise emergency election, the board was voted out by an overwhelming majority. The residents had had enough. A local law firm, eager to avoid further public backlash, reached out to represent me pro bono. The case against Karen quickly moved forward, and it wasn't long before the first dominoes fell. The criminal charges came down fast, filing false reports, animal cruelty, and even perjury. The evidence was undeniable, and Karen's lies were exposed for the world to see. The HOA, once the bastion of her power, was dissolved in the wake of her downfall. The new board was elected with a sense of purpose, no longer to enforce petty rules, but to protect the community from the abuse of power. They issued a formal written apology to me, and in a symbolic gesture, they donated the damages from my case to a local veterans service dog organization in Teddy's name. Karen, on the other hand, was left with nothing. Her house, sold at a loss, went into foreclosure after a series of lawsuits left her drowning in legal fees. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved 2 states away, trying to escape the humiliation. But it didn't matter. Her name had become synonymous with corruption and abuse. No one would forget the damage she caused, and she was left to lick her wounds in private. As for Sarah, the woman who had helped me bring Karen down, her life changed too. She had been a victim of Karen's manipulation, but she found the courage to speak out. In doing so, she became something of a local hero. People in the neighborhood started looking at her differently, no longer as Karen's assistant, but as someone who had taken a stand for what was right. Sarah quickly found a new job, one where she was respected and appreciated, and while our relationship started with tension, it grew into something of an unexpected friendship. Every now and then I'd see her walking Alfie, and we'd stop to chat. She was no longer afraid, no longer under the thumb of someone who had used her for personal gain. Teddy and I settled back into our rhythm, the peace we had fought for finally ours. The quiet in our home wasn't fragile anymore. It was earned. Teddy's park, his memorial of sorts, became a place for the community to gather. Neighbors who had once been too scared to speak out now walked their dogs freely, enjoying the space that Teddy had helped create. A week later, there was a ceremony at the small park at the end of our block. The mayor, the local news, and a crowd of our neighbors all gathered to honor Teddy. I stood beside him as the mayor placed a ribbon over his neck, a custom medal hanging from his collar. But the most powerful moment came when the mayor pulled the cord and revealed the new sign, Teddy's Park. The crowd cheered, and I could see the change in the faces around me. They weren't just honoring a dog. They were honoring the community they had become. Teddy didn't understand the significance of the medal or the park. He just knew that people were being kind, and that was enough for him. He trotted happily around the park, tail high, sniffing the trees as always. I sat on the bench watching him, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of the past few months lift. The question that had haunted me since this all began, how far will a man go to defend his own, had an answer. I had gone as far as it took, and in the end, it was more than worth it. As the sun dipped lower, Teddy pressed against my leg, his head resting on my lap. I scratched his ear, feeling the weight of the journey we'd been on together. This was our home, our peace, and no one was taking it away from us ever again.